Continuing our book review of Thomas Jefferson's The Art of Power. Alright, let's continue, and if you see any hateful trolling comments, please flag and report them. If I don't see them, I'm doing my best to patrol the comment section so that trolls don't really get their glory that they want. This is not that type of vibe, they know it, but some people have no life, so they just want to hang out on the channel to stir up trouble. So let's do our best to get them out of our zone so that we can learn from intelligent people instead of keyboard warriors, right? Okay, family, we're on page 94, okay? Peyton Randolph was dead. Patty Jefferson was sick, and a daughter had died. Jefferson was beset from seemingly every side. Then, in late October 1775, at Hampton near Norfolk, Virginia, the British tried to land armed parties from the British vessels to burn the town. Dunmore was in command of Norfolk, which gave the British a strategic base in a critical point of access. To the north, colonial troops under Benedict Arnold and Richard Montgomery were undertaking expeditions against Canada. And in Virginia, the Virginia Convention, which was governing in the wake of Dunmore's dissolution of the House of Burgesses, created a Committee of Safety, a civilian body to oversee the state's military. So we got the Committee of Safety, and then Dunmore, he dissolved the House of Burgesses. That's quite interesting. At that, Jefferson's love was in peril. The 11 months preceding the Declaration of Independence were a contentious time in which nothing was certain in his family except Patty's ill health, and in politics except conflict with overwhelming British force. Dang. In Philadelphia, Jefferson absorbed account after account, written by his most intimate friends, of the depredations of superior military force against Virginia. We care not for our own towns, and the destruction of our houses would not cost us a sigh. John Page wrote Jefferson, unconsciously echoing Jefferson's remark to him 5 years earlier after the Shadwell fire. I have long since given up mine as lost. Jefferson's political colleagues in the Pennsylvania State House were suffering the same fears over events in their own states. The human element of Jefferson's service in Philadelphia is sometimes minimized, with more attention paid to textual investigations of his resident state papers. I like the way that flows. Textual investigations of his resident state papers. It's very chunky. Yet the personal and the philosophical were intimately connected. The Jefferson of the summer of 1776 was shaped by the tensions and contests of 1775. What he read of the deteriorating relations with Dunmore and of the bloodshed and fears in Virginia steeled him for the war ahead. Dang, really tested his mettle, right? November 7th, 1775 is a forgotten date in the popular memory of American Revolution. But the events of that autumn Tuesday in Virginia had much to do with those that culminated in the passage of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia the next year. From his shipboard quarters at Norfolk, Dunmore declared martial law, and directly challenged white Virginia, ordering that any slave or indentured servant who took up arms against the American revolutionaries would be granted their freedom. Whoa! That's a political move. So Dunmore, he tells all the slaves that if you help us to overtake the plantation owners, you'll be granted freedom. Frightened white Virginians and sympathetic whites in other colonies suddenly saw their most fevered visions of slaves turning against masters, threatening to become real. The announcement drove a number of those who had been previously lukewarm about independence into the revolutionary camp. Jefferson thought instantly of his family. If Dunmore succeeded in inspiring an army of slaves and indentured servants, then Monticello might not be safe. Jefferson made plans for Patty and his family to escape in the event of violence, plans that included his joining them in presumably safe territory. I have written to Patty a proposition to keep yourselves at a distance from the alarms of Lord Dunmore, he wrote a brother-in-law in November. As Jefferson crafted emergency measures for his family, Word of Dunmore's strike swept up and down the eastern coast. What an interesting time. What would that be today? It would be the lower minimum wage working class against the billionaires. In late November, John Page was both defiant and pleading. For God's sake, endeavor to procure us arms and ammunitions, Page wrote Jefferson from Virginia. Page feared the British, and he feared an insurrection of the slaves. There was something else, too, the sense that the property of Virginia's elites would fall into the hands of the British. Oh, yeah, confiscation, because, during the rebellion, they would go, yeah. Some rascals, all foreigners, are already looking out for places and handsome seats, Virginia statesman Robert Carter Nicholas wrote Jefferson in late 1775. Robert Carter Nicholas. It's a very, typical, American name, sounds like a very, 1950s name, even though this is a 1700s name, but it still has, that interesting New York vibe to it. No country ever required greater exertions of wisdom than ours does at present, Nicholas wrote Jefferson on November 25, 1775. I fear no time is to be lost. As the session of the Congress drew to a close, Jefferson was named to a committee to ascertain unfinished business before Congress. He found 27 separate matters that required attention, from reports on currency and Indian affairs to the making of salt. A second Jefferson task served on a panel charged with planning the powers of a proposed committee to govern during the congressional recess. A committee to govern during the congressional recess. It was an instructive exercise, for it required Jefferson to analyze the role the Congress had been playing and discern which functions were essential. In a draft dated December 15, 1775, he listed 19 duties he saw as crucial, ranging from supplying the continental forces by sea and land, to gathering intelligence of the condition and designs of the enemy, to ensuring the defense and preservation of forts and strong posts, and to prevent the enemy from acquiring new holds. The emphasis on practical military matters was consistent with what had chiefly occupied Jefferson for months. With even his own family in possible danger, he wanted to make it clear that the Americans were ready to act an eye for an eye. Responding to reports that the American officer Ethan Allen had been captured in the Canadian campaign and was to be sent to Britain in irons to be punished for pretended treason. So Ethan Allen, who was an American officer, went on the Canadian campaign, gets captured, and now they want to send him to Britain to be tried for treason. Jefferson, in a draft declaration for Congress, said British prisoners would be held accountable for anything that happened to Allen. We deplore the event which shall oblige us to shed blood for blood, and shall resort to retaliation but as the means of stopping the progress of butchery, he said. But Americans would do what had to be done. Americans would do what had to be done. Very interesting language of this time. In the end, though the Congress deferred any decision to George Washington, the threatening draft shows that Jefferson saw the world as it was. Leaving Philadelphia on Thursday, December 28, 1775, he reached Monticello in the middle of January. It was a new year when he rode up the mountain. There were outward signs of life as usual. He opened a cask of 1770 Madeira and began to think about taking his wife back with him to Philadelphia to be inoculated against smallpox. But the enveloping crisis could not be kept at bay. On Sunday, February 4th, 1776, he was sent a new pamphlet entitled Common Sense. The cause of America is, in a great measure, the cause of all mankind, wrote Thomas Paine. Jefferson could not have agreed more. Okay, so a pamphlet entitled Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. We gotta read that in the future, fam. Wow. So Robert Carter Nicholas, Committee to Govern the Congressional Recess, American officer Ethan Allen, the Canadian campaign, Virginia planters in threat because of Lord Dunmore trying to get the slaves to revolt. Tower of London sending 2,000 Irish troops to target Virginia and lay waste. Colonial troops under Benedict Arnold and Richard Montgomery. And they also did an expedition against Canada. The dissolution of the House of Burgess. A new committee is formed, the Committee of Safety, which was a civilian body that oversaw the state military. Very cool. History is amazing. I love history.